Tonight on Movie Cat, we're getting in our DeLorean and heading back to 1930 to watch the surrealist masterpiece, L'Âge d'Or. L'Âge d'Or stars Gaston Modo and Leah Lee. It was written and directed by Louis Buñuel, with some input by Salvador Dalí, but the two friends were on the outs by the time the film was being made, so it is generally accepted that Dalí had little to do with the film. I'll be watching the region-free Blu-ray from the BFI that came out in 2011. L'Âge d'Or and Buñuel's previous film, Un Chien Andalou, are typically talked about as companion pieces. Personally, I prefer Un Chien Andalou, but L'Âge d'Or is probably the more important film, and we're going to talk about why that is. I'm grading L'Âge d'Or as a B- for general viewers, but for hardcore cinephiles, I'll give it an A. I'll explain why in a little bit. First, a little background. The Great War had a considerable amount of complex consequences. In the art world, the Dada movement began as a reaction to the war and what the members saw as its nationalistic origins. The Dadaists embraced absurdism as a means of illustrating the pointlessness of the war and attacking the bourgeois society that had facilitated it. In the early 1920s, André Breton, a French artist and member of the Dadaists, began a new art group dubbed the Surrealists. Breton was very much interested in Sigmund Freud's ideas and argued that true creativity began with the subconscious as manifested through dreams. Breton refers to surrealism as pure psychic automatism. This essentially means that the surrealist strives to communicate his subconscious ideas or visions without hindrance from his conscious self. As the conscious self is responsible for the censorship of visions, the surrealist must cut out this censor in order to achieve a new level and freer form of expression. This censor is not only responsible for reshaping ideas in order to not offend society, but also transforming visions so they do not contradict the physical laws of reality. Thus, the result of surrealist art pieces are pieces that do not attempt to capture reality, but also do not strive for the abstract. But Breton was also a communist and wanted surrealism to become a political movement that would free the minds of the working class and thus lead to the revolution. So, surrealism was much a political movement as it was an artistic one. Breton would hardly see a separation. Louis Buñuel, who had been working on mainstream films, took up the surrealist cause in the late 1920s. Un Chien Andalou was released in 1929. It is 16 minutes long and is made up of a series of surreal episodes strung together. L'Âge d'Or, released a year later, is an hour long, and while it doesn't have a proper plot, it does have the narrative structure that Un Chien Andalou lacks. To Buñuel's great disappointment, Un Chien Andalou was quite successful at the time of its release. Buñuel had set out to directly ridicule the art mainstream and the bourgeoisie, but had failed. They loved it. Could Un Chien Andalou have been too soft of a movie? Buñuel would not make the same mistake. L'Âge d'Or was commissioned and financed by French nobleman Charles de Noailles, who was a patron of the arts and wished to present the film to his wife as a gift. Buñuel accepted the financing, but ironically and dangerously, the film is a very harsh indictment of the European bourgeoisie and their Catholic religion. The film was originally planned as a sequel to Un Chien Andalou, but the two films are barely connected, if at all. Perhaps the chief thing that both films share is the motivation for making them in the first place. Buñuel, as a surrealist, was interested in tearing down the established notions of what constitutes art. Whether or not he was successful in this can be debated, but one thing is certain: he irrevocably altered its trajectory. Today, we think of surrealism as being about dream imagery, expressions of the artist's subconscious through a variety of means. It is true that this is an important part of the art form. However, we are separated by almost a century from the cultural and political situation of France after World War I. To most of us, those happenings are mere ghosts in dusty history books. The other side of surrealism, the political side, has no meaning or consequence to us in the modern world, which is a shame because understanding this is the key to understanding L'Âge d'Or. L'Âge d'Or is a film whose meaning has flipped. Buñuel intended the film to be a vicious political and social attack on the culture of his day. But that society has changed and evolved so much that in today's world, we basically have no understanding of what Buñuel's images mean. Because of this evaporation of political meaning, the dream imagery becomes more prominent. If surrealism is a balancing act between subconscious dream imagery and political activism, then L'Âge d'Or has slipped the fulcrum. L'Âge d'Or begins in a similar fashion to Un Chien Andalou, with the film telling the audience exactly what it is about to do. Beginning with a section of nature documentary about the behavior of scorpions, this first section shows that a scorpion's tail, read, tail, T-A-L-E, has 5 segments and is tipped with a poison stinger. This shows that L'Âge d'Or will also have 5 sections, as well as a poison ending. The Scorpion documentary also reveals a little bit about their behavior. The arachnids are antisocial. They hide under rocks and fight with each other. They will also take on and defeat much larger creatures, such as a rat in this case. L'Âge d'Or then begins its second part. In this section, the film depicts a ragged band of starving brigands. Their lookout spies a group of 4 Catholic bishops that have appeared on the shore. They are dressed in their full regalia and are chanting. The lookout, who can barely walk, he is so weak, departs to warn his comrades of the imminent invasion. Arriving at a ramshackle hut, he warns the 7 other brigands that the Majorcans have arrived. The entire group are very weak, dirty, and tattered. The brigands muster to repel the invaders, but they are so weak that as they head to the shore, one by one, they collapse, give up, and fail. The third section of L'Âge d'Or is where the film begins to pick up. Colonists start to arrive on the coast in boats, many colonists. After paying tribute to the now skeletal remains of the 4 bishops, the crowd of colonists began a groundbreaking ceremony for a new city, led by a city official, some military leaders, and priests. The ceremony is interrupted by the film's main characters, played by Gaston Modot and Leah Lee, rolling in the mud together and wailing with ecstasy. The crowd quickly pulls the lovers apart. Modot is arrested and led away. Lee is also sent away. The two are obviously distraught at being separated. The ceremony continues after the distraction, and the colonists place mortar on the first building block of the city. Part 4 of L'Âge d'Or starts off with more documentary footage. This time it is aerial shots of modern Rome. However, an intertitle informs us that it is Imperial Rome. The city is now a sprawling metropolis, but we soon pick up the action where Modot and Lee had previously left off. This section strings together several surrealist gags. There are several scenes of city life: buildings collapsing, a gentleman strolls down the sidewalk kicking a violin, another gentleman strolls in the park with a stone on his head, mimicking a statue of a priest with a stone on its head. When we catch up with Modot, he is still being led away by the police. He spies several posters that remind him of Lee. His frustration mounts. When we catch up with Lee, she is at her parents' mansion, where she and her mother discuss preparations for a party that will take place there that evening. Lee heads to her bedroom, where she finds a cow in her bed. She casually shoos the bovine away, but the sound of the cow's bell remains. Meanwhile, Modot is still being led away by the police. He hears the sound of the cowbell and instantly knows it is coming from Lee. Modot and the police pass a barking dog, and Lee can hear the dog barks. As she sits at her vanity, wind begins to blow, and we can hear the sound of the wind intermingling with the cowbell and the dog barking. To finish off this 4th section of the film, Modot reveals to the police his bona fides, that he is a member of the Goodwill Society. This fact will be ironically destroyed in the 5th part of the film. Dumbfounded, the police release Modot, and he departs in a taxi, but not after kicking a blind man to the ground. So begins the 5th part of L'Âge d'Or, the party at the mansion of Lee's parents. Many bourgeois guests arrive. As the party gets underway, a horse-drawn cart nonchalantly rolls through the main room. No one notices it. Outside, the estate's huntsman greets his small son. Back inside, a maid is suddenly killed by an explosion from the kitchen. Again, no one notices. Back outside, the boy plays a prank on his father, the huntsman, who then shoots and kills him. The partygoers do notice this sound and go to the balcony to observe, but no one cares, and the party continues. Finally, Modot arrives dragging a dress along behind him. At the party, Modot attempts several times to get to Lee, but they are continually thwarted by guests and then by Lee's mother. Eventually, they manage to sneak off to the garden, where they can engage in their lovemaking. The guests then head outside to listen to a chamber orchestra. Some of the musicians are dressed as priests. Lee and Modot are again interrupted by a butler, who tells Modot he is wanted on the phone. Frustrated that Modot has departed, Lee begins to suck the toe of a statue lasciviously. On the phone, the Minister of the Interior accuses Modot of some crime, to which Modot scoffs and returns to Lee. The screen goes black, and the minister shoots himself. His body lands on the ceiling. The conductor of the orchestra leaves his podium and enters the garden, where Lee leaves Gaston and kisses the conductor. Gaston, upset at this, stands and hits his head on a planter, and then departs. Gaston goes to Lee's bedroom, where he flounders on the bed despondently. He rips up her pillows and begins to throw things out her window, including a plow, a flaming tree, a bishop, a giraffe, and the pillow feathers. The final part of the movie is the poisonous stinger. A castle appears. It's only a model. Titles describe the scenario of the 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade and its 4 debauched main characters. They also tell that the ringleader of these evil men is emerging from the castle. At the front gate, Jesus emerges, along with 3 other men. An injured girl follows out the gate and then falls. Jesus takes the girl back into the castle and, finishes her off. He reemerges, but this time without his beard. This dissolves to an image of the cross with women's scalps hanging from it. Dun dun dun! That's the poison stinger. L'Âge d'Or is a film that is packed head to toe with meaning. Not a frame is wasted. Buñuel was not creating weirdness for weirdness' sake. Despite what people think today, that was not the point of surrealism. The film is metaphor after metaphor, analogy after analogy, and symbol after symbol, all with the purpose of causing trouble for the bourgeoisie. Perhaps the surrealists had hope for waking or shocking people out of their brainwashed existences, but in many cases, as with Buñuel, the art was chiefly a method of transmitting their anger. From Buñuel's autobiography, My Last Breath, although the surrealists didn't consider themselves terrorists, they were constantly fighting a society they despised. Their principal weapon wasn't guns, of course, it was scandal. Scandal was a potent agent of revolution, capable of exposing such social crimes as the exploitation of one man by another, colonialist imperialism, religious tyranny, in sum, all the secret and odious underpinnings of a system that had to be destroyed. The real purpose of surrealism was not to create a new literary, artistic, or even philosophical movement, but to explode the social order, to transform life itself. Even with our modern sensibilities, we are still able to decipher some aspects of the film, such as Modo and Lee making love in the mud, and the colonists rushing to tear them apart. Clearly, this is a statement about the prudish nature of French society in the 1920s. Also, the opening scene of the scorpions fighting. While the scorpion scene is partly a warning to the audience as to whom they were dealing with, it also reflects the infighting among the surrealist movement. Some of the smaller gags are also clear jabs at the bourgeoisie. A citizen strolling down the street, casually kicking a violin and then stomping on it, is a straightforward comparison for how the mainstream thinks of art and culture. Other scenes are more difficult to interpret, given our distance from the film that is almost 100 years old. For instance, the film's first sync sound utterance is "Stop it." This is a reference to the technology of the talkies that had just made its debut with the jazz singer in 1927. During this period, there was much debate about whether sync sound would destroy the aesthetic of the art form. It obviously changed it, but while Buñuel clearly wasn't against sync sound, he used the scene as a sarcastic analogy to the inevitableness of progress, and those who couldn't come to terms with change. Interestingly, he puts these first words in the mouth of the leader of the band of brigands, played by prominent surrealist Max Ernst. The gang is tired, disorganized, and undisciplined, and unable to defend against the invading colonists. That is to say, the surrealists were tired of fighting a society that overwhelmed them. L'Âge d'Or today is much less offensive than it was in the 30s. Western society today is much more tolerant of imagery that used to be offensive. For example, in L'Âge d'Or, a lot of the attacks on religion, especially the Catholic Church, were intended to be shocking, and were shocking at the time. Today, however, we would barely bat an eye at the sight of a monstrance touching the ground, or a cross with women's scalps on it. Because our society has grown to accept more offensive things, the scandalous goals of Buñuel become non-offensive. After all, this is an era in which the human centipede and Two Girls, One Cup are regularly joked about on mainstream TV. Much of entertainment today is dependent on extra-textual references, so much so that an evening talk show or any number of adult-oriented cartoons, or just about every modern sitcom, would not be understandable without the audience's firm grasp on modern mainstream culture. L'Âge d'Or is very much like this. The reason that it doesn't make sense is because we are not experiencing it within the context in which it was intended. L'Âge d'Or was rediscovered in 1979 and then re-released in 1980, 50 years after its initial assault on the beachhead. Professor Rachna Richards described what happened. When it was released, it garnered only half-hearted attention from a public that had become accustomed to assaults on their senses. In some ways, surrealism's success had been its failure. The notion of the visual assault on the eye had been appropriated by mainstream cinema, but it hadn't amounted to anything. Without the context in which L'Âge d'Or was made or originally viewed, the effect is that much of the political meanings are stripped away. We are left with a film where the dream imagery is elevated, where once it was overpowered. Meanings that were there all along became more lucid. While this might be a great disappointment to Buñuel, it could make the movie more about the sublime and ephemeral experience of the subconscious, that aspect of human nature that is unattached to place and time. So how does one review L'Âge d'Or? My dual grade system breaks down with a film like this. At this moment, I can hear Buñuel laughing. For general audiences, that is, general audiences of this modern era, I would give it a lower grade because of the difficulty in understanding Buñuel's messages. But L'Âge d'Or gains points for being such a highly important film for cinema history and the art world in general, so it gets a B-. As for its intended audience doesn't exist anymore. That would have been those people in French society of the 1930s that were the targets of Buñuel's political vitriol. If they saw the film, or rather, when they saw the film, there was riotous anger at the insults the surrealists were hurling at them, so much so that theaters were trashed, and in at least one case, ink was splashed on the movie screen. So in a sense, L'Âge d'Or was a tremendous success with its intended audience. In this special case, the modified intended audience of hardcore cinephiles and art historians, L'Âge d'Or of course gets an A. Even for the 1930s, L'Âge d'Or is a bit underwhelming in the technical department. The photography is adequate for the most part, and frankly a bit boring. The big exception to this is the scene when Lia Lee is gazing through her vanity mirror at the sky and clouds. A beautiful moment. But the film doesn't have much in the realm of dreamy photography as its predecessor did, Un Chien Andalou. This was probably by design, as Buñuel wanted to make the film more plainly offensive instead of romantically surrealist. The end result is a film with less emotional impact. Buñuel's use of sound in L'Âge d'Or is simply brilliant. Remember that this was the dawn of sync sound, a period when few filmmakers even knew what to do with it. Buñuel sets right to work juxtaposing sounds with picture that doesn't match, putting nonsense mumblings in the throats of the agents of religion, and having the star of the film make verbal reference to the fact that there are microphones being used. All pure surrealist troublemaking. By far, the oral jewel of the film is when the diegetic soundscapes of two unconnected locales mingle and merge to form a third surreal existence, to illustrate the lovemaking of the main characters that are on opposite sides of the city, and yet they are connected through sound. It's truly a remarkable moment. The acting in the film is very uneven and mostly quite poor. Of course, the quality of the acting is not the point. Most of the cast were non-professional actors, and many were simply friends or acquaintances of Buñuel. Gaston Moreau and Lia Lee were actually serious actors. Moreau had been acting for over a decade, and Lee was just beginning a career in Hollywood. Moreau's work in L'Âge d'Or provides a stable foundation for the drama to build from. His performance is even and unwavering. His character is mostly unpleasant, but this is by design, as his character is essentially the mouthpiece for Buñuel's bitterness. Because L'Âge d'Or doesn't really have any kind of traditional dramatic structure, Moreau's character, along with all the characters, doesn't have an arc. The character is basically a collection of hot-headed emotions. Lia Lee's character is considerably more interesting, but her performance is uneven. At times, Lee seems totally consumed within the scene, such as the statuary foot-filleting scene, but other times Lee's energy appears to be low, as if she is bored with the basic work of filmmaking. You can see this in her sync sound scene with the character's mother, but the strength of Moreau and Lee's performances were perhaps only chiefly important to Moreau and Lee and their respective careers. Buñuel had bigger fish to fry, and fry them he did, as is clearly seen in the reactions by the bourgeois audiences of 1930. The tragedy of L'Âge d'Or, surrealist cinema, and surrealism in general is that the bourgeoisie fought back, not with guns or swords or politics, but with glacial gentrification and appropriation. Hey movie cats, I'm just a puppet, but there are real cats out there that need your help, really. Please take some time to locate the cat shelter that is nearest to you and make a donation. And if you're in need of some love, as we all are, you can adopt a cat from that shelter and improve your life, as well as the lives of our feline friends. This week, Movie Cat is highlighting this shelter. Thanks so much for your help.